Let's look at the handout entitled Loss, L-O-S-S. Dr. Peggy Whiting, who is a lady from Nashville, Tennessee, made this statement: loss is an experience across the lifespan that demands the surrender of something personally significant and or familiar. A lot of times when we think about loss and grief, we think about it only through the situation of the loss of a physical being. But there's a lot of other things in life besides death that we may grieve about that's going to cause feelings of grief within our lives. So just for a little while, I want us to think about that and then go from there to the emotions of grief. What are some things besides death that is a loss to us that we grieve about? Name some. The loss of a job. Why would the loss of a job cause grief?
Well, men especially, that's part of our identity.
Okay.
That's what we do.
Right. Very true. It's what we do, is who we are. And I mentioned that last night. That person who's a type A personality that has, always been involved with people and giving commands and whatever. When they retire, if they don't come back and find something significant to fill their void in their life, there have been studies that show that in less than 2 years they're going to die because at retirement, you're who you are at home. But you may not be the colonel, or you may not be the CEO or whatever. And if you don't feel that with something, then that can just really affect you. Very true. The loss through being let go or being fired can certainly do that. But also think about that when you come home. There's less finances. That's going to impact your wife. It's going to impact your children. That's going to impact plans. All those things. Yes, ma'am.
Loss of independence.
Yes, your loss of health and the independence that goes with it. What don't hurt don't work. That statement you've heard before. But yeah, whenever you're not able to do the things that once you did and have to rely on others, then that can affect your emotions. That can affect your mind. That can affect the people around you, all those type of things. And so that certainly is a loss that causes grief. What else? Divorce. Someone said that divorce is a living death. And there may be some truth to that. If a person has, done the best that they can, until death do us part, we're going to remain faithful and true, and then someone chooses not to do that, then that is a grief, that is a hurt, and it can cause all kinds of issues, not just for you, but also for your children or grandchildren. And so it certainly impacts you. We had a situation of a lady that lived in our area, and she was talking to us about this, and she said, my husband and I were married in a good way for many years, and then he chose to break the vows that he made to me and to God and to those who were at our wedding, and he began to see other women. We tried to work through it, and he was not willing to do so. He wanted to continue to have his way, and finally I had to divorce him. But she said, the sad fact is that he is living in the same city that I'm living in. And so the places that we like to go frequent and eat at, I can no longer go because when I go, he's there with her. And he says, I feel like a slave in my own city. And that was really sad, but that's the way she felt about it because of that. Another lady made a comment to my brother and said, I don't mean this in the wrong way, but I would love to be able to visit my ex in the cemetery. Now her point was, I'm not going to take his life, But it would be much easier if I could go and visit with him there as opposed to where he is and what he's doing and the desecration of our lives together and the impact that it has on our children and grandchildren. Yes, divorce is a living death, and that really, really makes it hard on people, and it makes it really hard on families. Typically, in a marriage, there may be the good, there may be the not so good, and there may be the ugly in situations. And so when a person chooses or a person has to divorce their loved one, they are recounting all those years of the good and the not so good and the terrible. And so they're grieving the good because this may be the father of your children. And this may have been a man that provided for you and your family in a good, positive way for many, many years. So there was some good in it. This may have been someone who, was active in church and taught people, the ways of God in the years past and whatever. Only then to turn and to make choices that are against God's word and against the commitment that they made to you as a mate and all the terrible things that go along with it. So yes, there is a great grief that goes along with divorce. And we've had people come to our classes just for that very reason. Not over a physical death, but just the death of that marriage and all the ramifications of that. Any thoughts or any more comments about that one before we move to another one? I think we all understand that, and we should all be kind and understanding and not judgmental in those situations. We certainly know what the scriptures say about marriage, divorce, and remarriage. At the same time, we also need to make sure that we try to show our love and compassion to those people who may have been faithful and true to God and faithful and true to their vows, and yet still that other person chooses to do something and they end up divorcing, but they were doing the very best that they can, and that we treat them with the love and dignity that they have because it's sad enough already. Other losses besides death that we grieve about.
Stuff as a storm or fire.
Yes. Lost of a home because of storms or fires, very much so. That can be very devastating. And you have homeowners insurance, you can replace a home, but think about all those things in a home that you can't replace. In Guin, Alabama, there was a great tornado that came through, I believe it was around 1974. Killed about 16 people, and one of the elders' wives was telling me that some of the artwork that their daughter had done was found 250 miles away, that the storm had taken it and blown it that far, happened to have an address on it, and somebody mailed it back to them. But just that great devastation, and if you've been a part of that, Prattville was hit, about how many years ago? How many? 08, yes. I thought I heard that, yes. Other things besides death that we grieve about.
Moving.
I'm sorry?
Moving.
Moving, yes, moving. One lady said, I don't mind moving as long as I can take my bank and my grocery store with me. Because I know where the P's are, and they don't have to ask me to see all this identification. They know me by name. Yeah, there's a lot to be said for that. That certainly is true. And so, yes, ma'am.
I've moved 37 times when I moved to Prattville.
You moved how many times? 37 times.
One of the most traumatic things that you go through.
Wow. Yes. We hope to be moving in about 6 or 7 months, so thank you for your helpful words. we've had 2 yard sales, and we were talking about, okay, when's our next one? Because there's some things you don't want to move with you. But yeah, when you've been somewhere 27 years, that is, you're right. We're probably going to find that out, and I'll remember what you said. But that's exactly true. And so, yeah, it is an impact. It definitely does. Because you can't, and part of that is because in most cases you can't take your church with you. And that's really important to us. Having been a minister for 30 years, and then I got to choose the congregation to worship at, and we did so after looking at 12 other churches, congregations. In Florence, that's a good deal. I mean, you got churches on every corner, and almost all of them are great congregations. But that's really important to us because we want to make sure that wherever we go, we can fit in a good way, but also that they believe the same things that we believe. Did everybody hear that? She said your priorities changed, and you're exactly right. We moved to the Florence area because our children were growing up, and we wanted them to have really good impact. And where we had been, there were very few children, and so that really impacted them. That's exactly right. And then also your work, how far away it is, and then now it's where your doctors are, and those type of things. Yeah, and a house without steps. That may enter into it as well. I've had both of my knees replaced, and so that sort of enters into those things. Yes, yeah, very true. A fellow told us of having to bury his horse, and he said that horse was not just a horse. That horse was the one that he had ridden for many, many years. It was the horse that he first put his children on. It was the horse that he first rode around his grandchildren on. It was like part of the family. And so animals the same way. And that's really tough. We, as Brent said, I'm a preacher's kid, and we were at Northport. Dad was at Northport as a minister for 56 and a half years. And we had a dog named Heidi. Her official dachshund name was Gretchen Dauphine II, but we called her Heidi. And Heidi lived there in the preacher's home with us, and she was there for 15 years. And she was she believed in the souls of man. She ate 5 different shoes. She believed in the Word of God. She ate 3 Bibles. And one night she was cleansed and sanctified. She ate a whole box of chocolate X-Lax and lived to bark about it. But when us 3 children had all married, Mom and Dad called one night and said that she could no longer eat and that the doctor had said we need to put her down. And we were all crying because I wanted her in our wedding. At least I didn't allow that, but I really did. They said it was the best kid they ever raised. Mom and Dad said that about her. So yeah, animals are very important, especially if they were given to you by the loved one that has since died, because that may have been one of those last things. Maybe that dog was more than just a dog. It was your socialization. It was your protection. It was the one that barked whenever, somebody was coming up, all those things that go along with it. And so, yeah, a pet. And pets do grieve. Pets do grieve when another pet passes away. That can certainly be a loss. What else? Friends. I'm sorry? Friends. Yes. Proverbs 18:24, there is a friend that sticks closer than a brother. And so sometimes that is tough when you have to move away from them. And yes, we can chat on the phone and those type of things, but it's just not the same as being there. And that enters in. Somebody had a hand over here. We call that spiritual apostasy whenever a person chooses to leave the church and the grief that hurts. Yes, it is. Great. I've talked to a lot of people in recent years who have said that's really, really tough when people that helped teach you the way of God and showed you the way of God now has chosen to go another path, and that's really, really, really hard. and that is a grief, and that is a loss. There was a lady back in the back. Yes, ma'am. Yes, yes. We often don't talk about those, but one of the chapters in the book, Hope for Those Who Struggle, deals with miscarriage or SIDS, sudden infant syndrome death, or newborn death. But yes, very, very much so. When a family has so desired to have that child, and then they're expecting, and parents and grandparents, and it may be the first one, and they're so caught up in that, and then something happens. We don't even, again, often announce it, but yes, that is really, really tough. And I have family members who have dealt with that. And sadly, a situation where they had lost their second child through miscarriage, and they had to do the female surgery that they often do in cases like that. And as the person was there with the doctor was about to leave the room, and the wife was still groggy. And he said, the way I look at this, no pain, no gain. How terrible it would be that he would have said something like that. And yet those were his words to that hurting couple. No pain, no gain. And we can be really, we have to be really careful about what we say concerning folks. Somebody can, I've heard people say, well, you can have another one, but that doesn't replace the one that we had. And so, that was a child born in the image of God, created in love. If they have a being, and we certainly believe they do, then one day you'll be able to meet them in a better place. But that doesn't help now. And so we had to really be careful. And like I said, in Hope, the Hope book, there's chapters that deal with those kind of losses. Somebody else had a hand out. Yes?
Future desires or goals.
Future desires and goals. Very true. Maybe that an injury chooses that, or maybe there may be an illness that goes along with it. Maybe a person's about to branch out on a great career, and then a parent has something serious to happen, and they just have to put off their goals to take care of them. All kinds of things like that can certainly enter into it and can cause that kind of loss. Here's one that perhaps you might not think about unless you're older: the loss of children because of the empty nest. In other words, they grow up and they leave home, and some people say, yeah, but they keep on coming back. Well, sometimes that's true. My brother says, I've got one son 10 houses down, and I've got the other son a quarter of a mile away. They've got us hemmed in. Yeah, I remember one time both of our boys were at Free Hardeman for 1 year. One's a senior, the other was a freshman. And I remember looking at Lisa and saying, listen. She said, what? I said, it's so quiet. I didn't have any money, but it was so quiet, Two boys at Freed at the same time. But yeah, that certainly enters into that. Maybe the loss of home because of elderly needs. You had to move from that place that you helped build with your own hands because you can't do stairs anymore, or because it's not handicap friendly. There's too many steps. Those can be tough losses. Let me give you a few more. The loss of a limb, maybe an arm or a leg. That certainly can be a loss. The loss because of infertility, sort of going along with the idea of miscarriage. The loss of security. A lot of times, widows will begin to show those concerns because they're entering a home without anyone in it. And I know in situations where good church people have gone home with a widow, especially maybe in those early times, and walked through the house just to make sure there's nobody there so that they can feel secure because of that concern in that regard. The loss because of sexual abuse. 70% of foster care children are abused in one way or another. And a lot of our children have had to deal with those terrible situations. And so that's something that stays with them for a long, long time. Or it could be even in a marital situation where those things can happen. The loss because of separation by war. We did a workshop up in Clarksville, Tennessee, and Fort Campbell is real close to that. And they were telling us that every tour of duty the family has to go through where they sign all those papers in the event that they don't come back. And if that happens, where the personal effects are sent and who do you call first. And so every time that there's a tour of duty, those soldiers and their families have to deal with the prospect that he or she may not be coming back. And it's just that grief because, you're so grateful and hopeful that they're going to be coming back, but that can certainly enter into it. There can be the loss because of the missing person without any closure. The body can't be found or there is no body. And those things are certainly part of it. Well, we see all of those. Any others that you can think of that we haven't mentioned? The loss because of divorce or because of the death of someone. I remember a situation where we had some children there at the home and the father's girlfriend. So the father and mother were still legally married, but the father had his girlfriend. The mom had her boyfriend, and the father's girlfriend's mother died. And I remember our children there at the home saying, was that my grandmother or not? Because they couldn't figure that one out. And yet there was grief, there were some feelings that was going with it because they didn't that's one of those disenfranchised kind of losses. You don't really be able to acknowledge that. But we live in a world today that supposedly, mom, dad, and the kids are in the minority in America. So you're seeing more and more of those blended families or those type of mixed families where you're going to see more and more of that. And so yes, you're exactly right. Not someone that you're blood kin to, but because of other situations, there is a connection and you feel that. The point is, all these and others that we could talk about, there is grief because love plus loss equals grief. Even though we may not readily understand that. And it's not just the death of a person, it can be the death of so many others. Now let's look at the next one, grief. G-R-I-E-F. Grief is an individual experience, generally a painful feeling of sadness that usually follows an actual loss or precedes an anticipatory loss. What I want us to do is just for a moment, think about the emotions of grief by using these 5 letters, G-R-I-E-F, to think about some things that in life we grieve about that coincide with those words. And so first of all, I'm going to give you the first one. G stands for the letter God. God is certainly a part of our grief. He showed us his son who is a man of sorrows that lived with grief. And so certainly God is a part of our grief. And that's why he says, to be concerned about our grief. We see that in so many stories in the Bible. And so God is certainly a part of our grief. What other words in the letter, beginning with the letter G, can you think of that describe what grief is? Another word, letter G. Grave. Okay, and we can look at it in 2 different ways, where we're talking about the cemetery, the grave, or whether it's something serious. That certainly would be a part of it. Another word, gone. Sometimes that's a euphemistic phrase that we use to say they're gone. Now, when we're talking to children, we need to be careful about what we say, but we need to say it in such a way so that they understand that a person has died. Because, passed away may not mean a lot to them. right? That's an old phrase that's been used. But we need to be really careful about describing them. When we're talking to children about death, we need to only answer what they're asking. Because a teenager is going to be asking more specific questions as opposed to a 6-year-old. But at the same time, we need to make sure that when we're talking to the 6-year-old about a significant death in their family, then we explain to them that that person has died because passed away or gone or isn't here anymore. That can really mess them up. That's a good point. I remember a lady whose uncle or brother had died, who was an uncle to her children, and it was sudden and unanticipated, and she's in the throes of grief, and her child sees her crying and whatever, and she said, what's wrong? She said, well, Uncle Dave, what's wrong with Uncle Dave? And again, in her grief and all the despair, she said, he's gone to the dentist and he's not coming back. Well, now think about that from a child's perspective. When they say, we need to go to the dentist. I mean, you understand in the throes of grief, you say things you don't mean to, but that's certainly gone to the dentist didn't help that situation at all. Let me give you a few. Goofy. Grief makes us feel goofy sometimes. Lady said, I've lost my glasses. I just can't find them. I searched for 2 hours. Guess where they were? Right there on your head. A lady called her son. Somebody's tried to break into the house. He goes running over there. Look at the doorknob. It's twisted. Mom, it's been that way for 2 years. She'd never noticed it, but now that her husband had just died, she felt vulnerable. Grief can make us feel goofy. Lady came in. She was a widow. She had gone to the grocery store, which sometimes is tough enough to go alone, buy just for yourself. And she came in, and she had some groceries in her hand, and so rather than stopping in the kitchen, she went back to her bedroom, and she laid them down, and she thought, well, while I'm back here, I'm going to go ahead and pull back the covers. So she went ahead and pulled back the covers. Then went back to the kitchen and began to put things up, and she couldn't find her bacon. She said, I just know the bacon was right there on top of the sack. I just don't understand that. I just know I bought them. But she couldn't find it. A couple hours later, getting ready to go back to bed, I go back to the bedroom, goes back to the bedroom, pulls back the covers. There's her bacon. She said, I'm losing my mind. I'm putting my bacon to bed. No, grief just causes us to be goofy. And sometimes that's going to happen. Guilt, gut-wrenching. There can be other words that gigantic. This lady was going to the grocery store, which again, if you've had children and you lose children, that's really tough to go back. And a lady came up to the manager and said, there's this lady over there in the cereal aisle, and she's in the floor clutching a box of cereal. I don't know what's going on with her. He said, okay, I'll take care of it. Went over, sure enough, there she is in the floor clutching a box of cereal. He sat down beside her, put his arm around her and cried with her because he knew that cereal was the favorite of that child that had died, and this was the first time she'd come back. Sometimes people just need an arm around us. Other words with G that you can think of. Gripping, gratitude. Gratitude that you had that wonderful marriage. Growing. Let's now think about the letter R. Letter R. What are some words with again the letter R that deal with grief? Rough. Yeah. Nothing clean about it. It's really hard regardless of what the loss may be. Rut, one person said, I just feel like I'm in a rut. I'm just doing the same things over and over and over again. Other R words. Rage. Person may really feel a great deal of anger. I suggest to people, if regardless of the kind of loss that you have, if you feel a great deal of anger, here are some ways to help with it. First of all, get a tennis racket and have a good pillow and hit that pillow as long as you want to. Don't hit others, but use that to get it out. I've known of ladies who said they raked the yard clean. I mean, almost of the dirt because they were just trying to work out their feelings of frustration. Or go to these yard sales where you can buy 10-cent glass items and then follow the instructions. Go to a dumpster, open the dumpster, and then just throw that glass inside the dumpster, not outside. That might get you in trouble, but just do something like that. If you have to get rid of the feelings of frustration and anger that you have, because those are things that really are tough. Other words, real is very real. It's very real. Somebody said something else. Regret. All kinds of regret. Regret you didn't get to say what you wanted to. Regret you were not there when they died. Regret that they were not able to hold the grandchild or the great-grandchild that they so loved and looked forward to. So much regret that a person can have. Rejection. Sometimes people feel that way. They marry for life. Their loved one dies. They remarry. After a period of time, that person discards them through divorce. They feel rejected. And so that's certainly a word that they have to deal with. Remember. All kinds of remembrances that a person have. Resilient, one person said, trying to be that way, just trying to raw the feelings of that. Let's look at the letter I. What are some words that begin with the letter I that might suggest the idea of grief? Ill. We've said that it does sometimes lower a person's immune system, especially a widow or a widower. And so that certainly it goes along with that. One person said Italy, because they were planning after 40 plus years of marriage to go to Italy, and they couldn't because of the disease that she had. And so that was one of the feelings that he wrote down in regards to that. Isolation. Sometimes without meaning to, we may isolate that person and not include them in things, and so they may feel that way. Other I words. Insecure? Okay, insecure, yes. Very much a part of it, where a person just doesn't feel like things are going like they need to, and making decisions. Maybe the two of you had worked together on making decisions, and that was the person that you bounce ideas off of, and they're no longer here. And so you sort of feel insecure. Somebody else said something over here. Intense. Yes, this is something that's real. That's not just something secondary, but it's really there. And it can be insensitive. Just understand that in your grief journey, somebody, sometime is going to say something insensitive to you. And you just got to sort of look the other way. I remember a lady who made the statement, she lost her mom, and somebody said to her, "You had her for so many years." And that just aggravated her to no end. She said, "Yet I wanted to say, and I'd like to have her even now. It didn't matter how many years I had her." And so that was insensitive to her. Or people who have lost a child, "Well, you can have another one." That's just negating the love and the value of that one, whether it was miscarriage or stillbirth or whatever the case may be. And so insensitive statements are often made, and the less we say, the better. Those are words that certainly enter into it. Incapacitated, some person felt like. One person said intellectually stagnating was the way they described their grief. Now somebody had to really think a lot on that one. But those are just words that can enter into it. Irrevocable, ignorant, if only. Those are real words that we deal with in grief. The letter E. What do you think of? Emotional, very much so. Somebody else said? Emptiness. Lady in Knoxville, Tennessee was at a Compassionate Friends chapter. Those are the ones that deal with the loss of children. She had dealt with the loss of 3 children, all of them perfectly formed, healthy at the birth. One died in a car accident, the other died in other ways. She lost all 3 of her children, and when somebody asked her how she felt, she said, "I feel empty." And a person can easily feel that way, and you can understand that. Eating alone, that was said by a widow, because it's really tough sometimes to do so. They said, you why buy groceries? Because you can't eat enough of it, unless you find a plate for one. And eating alone can certainly enter into that. Every day, everywhere, somebody talked about their grief being in that manner. Other words beginning of the letter E. Exhaustive or exhausted? Yeah, it can certainly do so. Some people want to sleep all the time. Others talk about not being able to sleep hardly at all. And it can certainly leave you exhausted. Explosive. Things of that nature. Okay, then finally the letter F. Words with the letter F. Hearing that, certainly family enters into our grief, and we hope that they surround us with love and care and concern. Other F words. I'm sorry. Okay, very true, very true. That's a good one. Also, I'm sorry, what? Fear. The fear of decisions, the fear of what's going to happen tomorrow, the fear, all kinds of things that go along with that. Frustration, facade, I'm just going through the motions, a person will say. Fatality, frantic. Now, the reason we do that is for this. If you were to choose just one of those many words that we've talked about, that grief is gigantic, that grief is real, that grief involves isolation, that grief involves emotions, that grief involves the idea of frustration, that'd be enough. But look at all these and so much more that we could talk about. And so when we're talking about grief, we're talking about the enormity of what it is. And it's not just those 5 emotions, but there's many, many, many more. That ball of emotions, there's just so much more. And so as we think about our grief journey, we have to think about not only the losses besides death that we're dealing with, but also all these emotions that go along with this as well. Now what we're going to do is take just about a 5 to 7 minute break, and then we're going to come back and talk about your grief room. And so let's do that and then come back and we will get started in just about 5 to 7 minutes.